The fall of the envelope. Victoria Chen pressed the elevator button for the 15th floor, her fingers trembling slightly, and she told herself it was only the coldness of the building's air conditioning, but deep inside she knew it was not, the temperature that made her hands unsteady. It was the envelope inside her purse, the envelope that carried more weight than its thin paper should ever have carried. It was not just paper and ink, it was a fragile piece of her heart placed carefully inside, and today, of all days, it decided to burn like fire against her chest. Sterling Enterprises was a tower of glass and steel that seemed to rise into the clouds, a symbol of power and ambition. People rushed around with the kind of urgency that made it seem as if every second was a matter of life and death. Phones, pressed against ears, tablets flashing presentations, and assistants carrying cups of coffee like soldiers on a battlefield. Victoria had worked here for 2 years. She knew this rhythm well, and though she walked among them every morning, she often felt she was drifting in a world that was not completely hers. Her role as a marketing coordinator was steady enough. She knew her tasks, she wrote reports, she organized campaigns, she followed orders from those above, and she smiled at colleagues who rarely looked past her polite greetings. It was fine, it was stable, but there was always this quiet emptiness inside her. A whisper that life was meant to be more than scheduled meetings and endless spreadsheets. She wanted connection. She wanted to be seen. Not for her work or her polite nods in hallways, but for her heart, her laughter, her flaws, her dreams. The envelope inside her purse represented that longing. Her best friend Penelope Martinez had begged her for months to accept a blind date. Penelope was the kind of person who believed love could appear anywhere, even in the middle of chaos. She insisted that Victoria had been single for far too long, and the world was missing out on someone like her. Victoria had resisted at first. She said she was too busy. She said blind dates were awkward. She said she was fine on her own. But Penelope was persuasive. She promised the man she had in mind was not like the others. His name was Robert Hayes. Penelope had whispered it like it was some secret treasure. She said he was kind, successful, and surprisingly down to earth. He cared about books. He cared about people. He thought marketing coordinators like Victoria were unsung heroes of the business world. Victoria had laughed at that, half in disbelief, half in hope, and after many nights of Penelope's persistence, she finally gave in. She wrote a small note to include with the invitation. Not because she was required to, but because she wanted to be honest. She wanted to tell whoever sat across from her that she was looking for something real, something built on patience and respect, something worth waiting for. She slipped that note into the envelope along with the dinner details, and all morning she had felt its presence, like it was more than paper, like it was a living thing she carried with her. As the elevator doors closed, she whispered to herself, "You are overthinking this. It is just a date. People do this all the time." But the words did not calm her. The elevator climbed steadily, upward, stopping at the 10th floor where a group of executives entered. They spoke in low voices about quarterly projections, expansion plans, and numbers that sounded too large for Victoria to even imagine. She kept her eyes on the panel of buttons, watching the floors light up one by one, 11th, 12th, 13th. Her heart seemed to climb faster than the elevator itself. She shifted her coffee cup to her left hand and her right hand brushed against her purse. She wanted to be sure the envelope was still there. At the 14th floor, the elevator jolted just slightly, but enough to ruin her balance. Her purse slipped from her shoulder. The coffee cup tilted dangerously, and before she could steady herself, the white envelope slid out as if it had wings of its own, floating slowly, cruelly, in front of all those polished shoes and tailored suits. Victoria's eyes widened in horror. She reached out, but it was too late. The envelope drifted down until it stopped at the shoes of a man standing in the corner. He bent down to pick it up, his movement smooth, practiced, and when he straightened, Victoria felt her breath vanish. It was Nathan Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises. She had seen him in meetings, she had watched him speak at company gatherings. His voice was calm but carried weight. Every room fell silent when he opened his mouth. And now here he was, holding her envelope. "I believe you dropped this," he said, his voice quiet, but the kind of quiet that made people pay attention. Victoria's face burned with embarrassment. Her chest tightened. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the elevator floor. She could not speak. She could only stare at the envelope like it was a bomb about to explode. Nathan looked at it for a moment, his brows narrowing, and Victoria saw his thumb brush lightly over the paper as if testing its weight. He was not the kind of man who wasted time. Yet something about this envelope made him pause, and then his eyes lifted toward her, calm but sharp, and in that moment Victoria felt completely seen, more than she ever had in her 2 years at Sterling Enterprises. The elevator doors opened with a chime. Executives filed out, still speaking of numbers and markets. But Nathan remained, holding the envelope between his fingers. Victoria's pulse raced. She reached out quickly, whispering, "Thank you," but her voice cracked. Nathan handed it back without a word, but as he did, his gaze lingered just long enough to leave her unsettled, just long enough to suggest that he had noticed something she wished desperately to keep private. As the doors closed again, Victoria's mind spun, her heart pounded. She clutched the envelope tight against her chest, praying he had not looked too closely, praying he had not guessed the truth inside. She told herself it was fine. He would forget about it. He had more important things to think about. Yet the weight of his gaze stayed with her, heavy and undeniable. She did not know that Nathan Sterling, a man who rarely noticed the small details in the whirlwind of his empire, had seen more than she wanted him to. He had seen the words written in delicate handwriting on the front of the envelope, words that were not meant for him, words that read, "For my blind date, and for reasons he could not explain." Those words refused to leave his mind. The CEO's curiosity. Nathan Sterling was a man who lived his life according to schedules, numbers, and outcomes. His days were measured not in quiet moments but in the ticking of clocks, the buzz of notifications, and the endless stream of decisions that shaped an empire. He was the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a company whose reach extended far beyond the glass walls of its headquarters. And yet, in the midst of power and influence, he often felt a silence inside himself that no meeting could fill. That morning, when the envelope had touched his shoes in the elevator, he had intended only to return it quickly, yet his eyes, sharpened by years of reading contracts and market projections, had caught the handwritten words on the front. For my blind date. They were simple words, but they struck something within him, like a quiet echo of a life he had left behind. He had handed it back without comment, but as the elevator carried him higher, he found himself replaying the image of the young woman holding it close. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes lowered in embarrassment. Victoria Chen. He remembered her name. From company rosters, she was not one of the executives who appeared in board meetings, but he recalled once seeing her speak during a small marketing presentation. Her voice had trembled at first, but her ideas had been creative, thoughtful, and practical. He had admired the way she pushed forward even when her nerves threatened. To silence her, most executives had forgotten her presence within hours, but something about her had lingered faintly in his memory. And now, here she was again, intruding into his thoughts through nothing more than an envelope meant for someone else. He tried to return his focus to the day's demands, the financial report waiting on his desk, the video call scheduled with international investors, the legal matters that required his signature. But his mind betrayed him. Each time he paused, between tasks, he thought of the note hidden inside that envelope. He imagined what kind of words she might have written. Were they lighthearted or were they serious? He suspected they carried honesty because there had been a kind of vulnerability in her eyes that morning, the kind that could not be faked. By late afternoon, he was unsettled enough to call his assistant. He asked for Victoria Chen to come to his office. The assistant raised an eyebrow, for it was not often that the CEO requested the presence of a marketing coordinator. But no one questioned Nathan Sterling's decisions within minutes. Victoria stood outside his office door, her pulse racing so loudly she was sure others could hear it. She feared she was in trouble. Perhaps he thought the incident in the elevator had been unprofessional. Perhaps she would be dismissed. Her hands tightened around the strap of her bag as the assistant opened the door and gestured her inside. Nathan looked up from his desk when she entered. His office was wide, with tall windows that stretched to the ceiling, casting light across polished wood and steel. Victoria felt small in comparison. She forced herself to stand straight, though Every nerve in her body screamed with unease. "Miss Chen," Nathan said, his tone steady, not harsh, not cold, but unreadable. "Thank you for coming." She nodded quickly, her voice faint when she replied, "Of course, Mr. Sterling." There was a silence, long enough for Victoria to wonder why she had been summoned. Then Nathan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "I wanted to ask you something, and I would appreciate your honesty this morning when you dropped that envelope. It seemed important to you." His eyes met hers, calm but searching. "May I ask what was inside it?" Victoria froze. Her heart seemed to stop. She wanted to deny everything, to say it was nothing, a mistake. But his gaze held her, and she realized this was not the CEO asking as a superior. This was a man asking as a person, carefully, gently. She swallowed hard, her cheeks warming. "It was an invitation, sir. My friend arranged a blind date for me, and I wrote a note to include with it." She looked down, embarrassed. "I suppose it slipped out at the worst possible time." Nathan was silent, but something shifted in his expression, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even admiration. "A blind date," he repeated softly, almost to himself. "And you wrote a note." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "I wanted to be honest. To say what I was really looking for. I suppose it is old-fashioned, but I believe some things are worth waiting for. I do not want to waste time on people who do not share the same values." She stopped, realizing she had said more than she intended. Her eyes lifted nervously. "I am sorry, I should not have spoken so openly." Nathan leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady on hers. "Do not apologize." His voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. Honesty is rare, and it is more valuable than most people realize. His words startled her, for she had expected a lecture about professionalism, not validation of her personal hopes. She could not understand why he cared. Yet in that moment she saw a softness in him that was never visible in board meetings, a trace of something human beneath the weight of his position. Their conversation shifted gently, unexpectedly. He asked her about her work, not the numbers or deadlines, but how she felt about it. Did she enjoy it? Did she find meaning in it? No superior had ever asked her such questions. Victoria found herself speaking cautiously at first, but gradually her words flowed. She told him she liked her role, but sometimes she feared she was invisible. Sometimes she wondered if her ideas mattered at all. Nathan listened, truly listened, not interrupting, not dismissing, his face thoughtful, his silence respectful. When she finished, he said quietly, "Your ideas matter more than you think, Miss Chen. Sometimes the smallest voices carry truths that the loudest overlook." Her chest tightened at his words, because she had never expected them from him, from the CEO who seemed untouchable. She left his office that day feeling unsettled, confused, but also strangely lighter, like a window had opened where she thought only walls existed. For Nathan, after she left, the silence in his office felt heavier than usual. Her words lingered, her honesty lingered, and for the first time in years he found himself wondering about more than profits and strategies. He wondered about connection, about the courage it took to be open in a world that rewarded masks. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the city through the tall windows, and whispered to himself, "Why does she remind me of the person I used to be?" A connection beyond work. The days after her meeting with Nathan Sterling felt strangely different for Victoria Chen. She still sat at the same desk. She still typed the same reports, and she still joined the same marketing meetings. But inside, something had shifted. She could not stop replaying his words in her mind. "Your ideas matter more than you think." They were simple words. Yet for someone like her, who often felt invisible in the vast machinery of Sterling Enterprises, they were like a spark in the dark, and yet the spark was mixed with unease. Why had the CEO asked her about her blind date? Why had he listened so carefully when she spoke? Victoria told herself not to overthink it. He was simply being polite. He had probably forgotten her words the moment she left his office. But deep down, she knew he had not. The way his gaze had lingered, the way his voice had softened, those were not things she could easily dismiss. The evening of her blind date soon arrived. Penelope Martinez had called her 3 times already, reminding her to wear the navy dress they had picked out together, to smile even if she was nervous, and to keep her heart open. Victoria tried to laugh through the phone, but her hands were shaking as she adjusted her dress in the mirror. She whispered to her reflection, "It is only dinner. It is only a meeting with someone new." But her reflection did not look convinced. The restaurant was elegant but not intimidating. Soft lights glowed above tables covered in white cloths, the sound of clinking glasses mixed with low conversations. Victoria arrived early. She always arrived early. Her envelope with the note had already been delivered to Robert Hayes. At least she hoped so. She sat at the table assigned to her, folding her hands together, her heart racing each time the door opened. What she did not know was that on the same evening, in the very same restaurant, Nathan Sterling had agreed to a business dinner with 2 international partners. He had chosen the location because it was quiet and discreet, a place where discussions could happen without interruptions. Yet when he stepped inside and glanced across the room, his eyes caught something he had not expected. Victoria Chen sitting alone at a table, her posture both hopeful and uncertain. Nathan hesitated for a moment, then reminded himself that it was coincidence. She was here for her own reasons, he was here for his still. As he sat with his business associates and attempted to discuss numbers and strategies, his gaze kept drifting back to her. He noticed the way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the way she checked the time discreetly, the way her eyes lit up briefly whenever someone entered, only to dim again when it was not the person she was waiting for. Finally, Robert Hayes arrived, a tall man in a sharp suit, confident in his stride. Victoria stood politely to greet him, relief on her face, but within minutes of their conversation, Nathan could see the disappointment begin to settle in her expression. Robert leaned back in his chair, speaking casually, almost carelessly, as if this meeting was nothing more than an item on his to-do list. Victoria smiled politely, but her smile did not reach her eyes. Nathan felt a strange tension building inside him. He had no right to feel anything. Yet he did. He wanted this evening to be meaningful for her, because he had seen her sincerity. He had heard her honesty. He knew how much courage it took for her to write that note, and to see her treated with indifference unsettled him deeply. The dinner at his own table continued. His associate spoke of contracts, but his attention drifted again and again to Victoria. She asked Robert about his work, about his passions, her voice carrying genuine curiosity. But Robert glanced at his phone more than at her. He spoke in short answers as though the evening bored him. By the time dessert menus arrived, Robert checked his watch and stood abruptly, saying he had another engagement. Victoria tried to hide her disappointment. She smiled politely, thanked him for coming, and watched as he left without a second glance. She sat there alone for a moment, her hands folded tightly, her eyes lowered. Nathan excused himself from his table under the pretense of taking a call. His steps carried him across the restaurant. Before he even realized what he was doing, he stopped at her table, and Victoria's eyes widened when she looked up to see him standing there. "Mr. Sterling," she whispered, her voice trembling with surprise. Nathan gave a small nod, his tone calm but gentler than usual. "I noticed your guest left rather quickly. May I sit?" Victoria hesitated, unsure if she was dreaming, but she nodded, and Nathan took the seat opposite her. For the first time since she had joined Sterling Enterprises, she saw him not as the CEO towering above everyone, but as a man sitting across from her, a man who had chosen to cross the distance between their worlds. He looked at her with a quiet sincerity and said, "I hope you will not mind my honesty, but I could not help noticing the way he treated you. You deserve more than that." Her throat tightened, emotions rising. She had not expected kindness from him. "Not here. Not like this," she whispered back. "It is only a date. Maybe it was not meant to be." Nathan's eyes held hers, steady, thoughtful. "Or maybe it is meant to remind you of your own worth." In that moment, Victoria felt something shift again, as if the ground beneath her life had tilted slightly. Her blind date had ended in disappointment, but across from her sat the most unlikely person, speaking words that touched her more deeply than she could explain. When masks fall, the restaurant felt quieter once Robert Hayes had gone. as if even the air itself was relieved. His careless presence no longer filled the space. Victoria Chen sat with her hands folded on the table, unsure what to do, unsure if she should leave. But before she could gather her thoughts, Nathan Sterling had already taken the seat across from her, his presence commanding yet oddly gentle at the same time. For years, Victoria had only seen him in conference halls, his voice echoing with certainty, his posture unshakable, his words chosen to influence investors and inspire employees. But here, under the soft glow of restaurant lights, she saw something else. His shoulders seemed less rigid, his eyes less guarded, as if for once he was not speaking as a CEO but simply as a man. Nathan leaned slightly forward, his voice steady. "You know, Miss Chen, people often wear masks in places like these. They pretend to be interested. They pretend to be kind, but eventually the truth shows. Your date tonight showed his truth rather quickly." Victoria let out a faint laugh, though it carried more sadness than humor. "Yes, I suppose he did. Penelope always says I should give people a chance, but maybe I expected too much. Maybe I wanted something real." Nathan studied her quietly. Her honesty was disarming. He was used to conversations wrapped in layers of strategy, every word calculated for advantage. Yet here was a woman who spoke simply, without pretense. It reminded him of a part of himself he had long buried, a younger version of Nathan who once believed love could exist without conditions, before ambition and success hardened his heart. "Expecting something real is never too much," he said softly, his tone carrying weight. "The problem is that too many people settle for less. They forget they are worthy of more." His words caught Victoria off guard, for they felt personal. Too personal for a CEO to say to a marketing coordinator. Her chest tightened as she looked at him, searching his face for a sign of why he cared. But all she found was sincerity. Their dinner stretched longer than Victoria had imagined, not because of food or drinks, but because of conversation. Nathan asked her questions no one had asked her before, not about deadlines, not about campaigns, but about life, about what brought her joy, about the moments she remembered most from her childhood, about what she dreamed her future might hold. She found herself opening up, slowly at first, then with growing ease. She told him about her love for painting, a hobby she had abandoned when work consumed her evenings. She told him about her grandmother's advice to always choose kindness, even when the world rewarded cruelty. She admitted her fear of becoming invisible, of spending her life working in the background without anyone ever seeing her true self. Nathan listened without interruption, his eyes never leaving hers. His silence was not empty. It was the kind that told her he valued every word. When she faltered, he encouraged her gently, and when she spoke of her fears, he did not dismiss them. He acknowledged them with quiet respect. In turn, he spoke of his own life, in ways he rarely did with anyone. He admitted that success had come at a price, that he often walked into his grand home at night only to be met by silence, that there were days when he wondered if the empire he had built had cost him the chance at something more meaningful. His voice was calm, but Victoria heard the heaviness underneath, a weight that no amount of wealth could remove. For the first time, she saw the man behind the title, and he was not untouchable. He was human, vulnerable, and in many ways lonely. Outside the restaurant, rumors had already begun to swirl. 2 junior employees from Sterling Enterprises had spotted the CEO sharing dinner with a marketing coordinator. By morning, whispers would travel through the hallways. Speculations would grow. Some would call it favoritism, others would call it scandal. Victoria did not yet know this, but she could already sense the risk as she walked out of the restaurant beside Nathan, her steps slow and uncertain. She whispered, "People will talk. They always do." Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable, then he said, "Let them. People will always talk, but at the end of the day, only you know the truth of your heart." His words warmed her, but also scared her, because she was beginning to realize that what she felt around him was not just respect. It was something deeper, something she had not expected, yet something she could not ignore. Back in her apartment that night, Victoria lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart still beating too fast. She told herself it was dangerous, that she was just an employee, that he was a CEO with a world far removed from hers. Yet she could not silence the memory of his eyes across the table, the honesty in his words, the way her laughter had felt lighter in his presence and in his own penthouse. Nathan sat alone at his desk, papers spread out before him, but unread, his thoughts circling the evening again and again. For years he had worn the mask of power, of control. But tonight, with Victoria, he had allowed it to slip, and instead of weakness, he had felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Yet even as hope stirred within both of them, shadows gathered quietly, because the world they lived in thrived on appearances, and whispers had already begun to spread. Whispers that could turn fragile beginnings into storms. The truth that changes everything the following week at Sterling Enterprises carried a strange tension. Whispers traveled faster than emails in break rooms and corridors. Employees leaned close to each other, voices lowered. "Did you see the CEO at dinner with her?" some asked. Others speculated about what it meant. Victoria Chen felt the weight of their eyes, the way conversations paused when she entered, the way laughter seemed to follow her when she walked past. She told herself not to care, but the truth was, it hurt. Yet, in the middle of this storm of rumors, Victoria also found her strength tested in unexpected ways. A major campaign for one of the company's biggest clients had begun to unravel. Deadlines were missed, presentations failed, and panic spread through the marketing department. Executives scrambled. Voices grew louder, but clarity seemed far away. Victoria, tired of standing in the background, quietly stepped forward. She gathered the scattered pieces of the project. She worked late nights, revising strategies, coordinating teams, and calming nervous colleagues. Her voice was calm when others panicked, her hands steady when others hesitated. She remembered what Nathan had told her. "Your ideas matter more than you think." And she let those words guide her. On the day of the client meeting, Victoria stood in front of a room filled with senior executives and skeptical partners. Her heart beat hard, but her voice carried with confidence she had not known she possessed. She presented the revised campaign with clarity, connecting ideas not only with logic but with passion, showing how each detail could resonate with real people, the very essence of marketing. Silence filled the room when she finished. Then slowly, one by one, heads nodded. The clients exchanged glances and smiled. "This," one of them said, "is exactly what we needed." Relief washed over her team. The crisis had been saved not by an executive, not by a polished senior director, but by Victoria Chen, the marketing coordinator who had once believed she was invisible. Nathan Sterling watched all of this from the back of the room, his chest filled with something stronger than pride. It was admiration. It was respect. It was recognition. Not of an employee, but of a woman who carried more strength than she even realized. When the meeting ended, applause filled the space, and for the first time, Victoria did not feel like she was standing in the shadows. She felt seen that evening at the company's quarterly gathering. Nathan stood before hundreds of employees. He spoke of challenges overcome, of achievements gained. But then, breaking from his usual pattern, he said, "I want to acknowledge someone who reminded us all what courage and clarity look like." When others faltered, she stepped forward, not because it was her responsibility, but because it was the right thing to do. "Victoria Chen, your work saved this campaign. And more than that, you reminded us what leadership truly means." Applause roared through the hall. Victoria's cheeks flushed, her heart swelling with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. The same colleagues who had whispered now clapped, and though some whispers would continue, they could no longer deny her worth. Later, when the event had ended and the hall had grown quiet, Nathan found her standing near the balcony, her hands resting on the railing as she looked out at the city lights. He approached, his voice softer than the hum of the city below. "Miss Chen?" She turned, her smile small but genuine. "You did not have to say all that, I did," he replied simply. Because it was true. A silence stretched between them, filled not with awkwardness but with something unspoken, something fragile yet undeniable. Finally, Nathan took a breath and said, "There is something I must tell you, something I should have told you earlier." He looked directly into her eyes. "That day in the elevator, when your envelope fell, I did not mean to, but I saw the words written on it. I saw for my blind date, and though I returned it to you, those words have stayed with me. They changed something in me. Victoria's chest tightened. She clutched the railing, unsure if she should feel angry or relieved, but his gaze held only honesty. No arrogance, no manipulation, just truth. I realized, he continued, his voice low, that I have spent too long living behind walls, hiding behind success, convincing myself that connection no longer mattered. But then you came, with your honesty, with your courage, and suddenly, I could not ignore the truth. I wanted to know you, not as an employee, not as a name on a roster, but as the woman who wrote that note with such sincerity. Tears pricked at her eyes because deep down, she had feared her words would never matter to anyone. Yet here was the CEO of the company, telling her that her honesty had broken through the fortress of his world. She whispered, I was never really looking for Robert, I think. Deep down, I was waiting for someone who would truly see me. Not just what I do, not just the title I carry, but me. Her voice trembled. And somehow you did. Nathan's hand reached slowly, carefully, for hers, his touch gentle, uncertain, as if asking permission. When she did not pull away, he whispered, Maybe fate made sure I found that envelope. The city lights glowed around them. The whispers of the company faded into the distance. And in that quiet moment, masks no longer mattered, positions no longer mattered, only truth remained for Victoria Chen, the woman who once felt invisible, and Nathan Sterling, the man who once believed himself untouchable. The truth they had feared became the very thing that set them free, and as they stood side by side, hand in hand, they both realized something. Sometimes the greatest changes in life come not from grand plans or perfect timing, but from accidents, from fragile moments when an envelope falls and the truth finally finds its way into the light.